That night in Las Vegas, when 8-year-old Tommy's tears caught Elvis's attention, no one expected the music to stop in the middle of the song, but the phone call Elvis received before taking the stage, when he learned why the little boy was crying, changed everything, because a true king never leaves a child heartbroken. Tommy Richardson was not your typical 8-year-old boy. While most children his age were fascinated by cartoons, video games, or sports heroes, Tommy had developed an extraordinary and profound connection to the music of Elvis Presley that seemed to transcend his young years and touch something deep within his soul. Living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Las Vegas with his single mother, Sarah Richardson, Tommy had grown up surrounded by the sounds of Elvis's music playing softly in the background of their daily life. Sarah, a 28-year-old cocktail waitress who worked the evening shift at one of the smaller casinos on the Strip, had been an Elvis fan since her own childhood, and she had unknowingly passed this musical passion down to her son. Tommy's fascination with Elvis went far beyond casual listening. He had memorized the lyrics to dozens of songs, could identify different albums by their distinctive sounds, and had an almost supernatural ability to detect the subtle emotional nuances in Elvis's voice that many adult listeners missed entirely. When Elvis sang about loneliness, Tommy seemed to understand that feeling despite his young age. When Elvis performed upbeat, celebratory songs, Tommy's entire demeanor would transform with joy and energy. The walls of Tommy's small bedroom were covered with pictures of Elvis that his mother had carefully cut out from magazines and newspapers over the years. His most prized possession was a worn vinyl record of Love Me Tender that Sarah had found at a garage sale, which Tommy would play repeatedly on an old turntable that had belonged to his grandmother. But Tommy's love for Elvis's music had taken on an even deeper significance during the past year, as he and his mother had been facing challenges that would test the strength of any family, let alone a single parent and her young child navigating life's difficulties together. Sarah had been working double shifts at the casino for months, trying to save enough money to pay for mounting medical bills and keep up with their basic living expenses. Tommy, despite his young age, had become acutely aware of his mother's stress and exhaustion, though he didn't fully understand all the complexities of their financial situation. During the long evenings when Sarah was at work, Tommy would stay with Mrs. Elena Vasquez, their elderly neighbor who had become like a surrogate grandmother to him. Mrs. Vasquez, a kind woman in her 70s who had emigrated from Mexico decades earlier, would often tell Tommy stories about her own life, while Elvis's music played softly in the background, creating a warm and comforting atmosphere that helped ease the boy's anxiety about his mother's absence. It was during one of these evenings that Tommy first learned about the devastating news that would change his young life forever. Mrs. Vasquez had been unusually quiet that particular night, and Tommy noticed that she seemed sad and worried about something she wasn't telling him. Finally, after much gentle questioning from the perceptive child, Mrs. Vasquez sat down beside Tommy on her old sofa and explained, in the careful way adults use when delivering difficult news to children, that his mother had been to see a doctor recently and had received some very serious news about her health. "Your mama is sick, mijo," Mrs. Vasquez said softly, using the Spanish term of endearment she always used with Tommy. "She has something called cancer, and the doctors are going to try to help her get better, but it's going to be very difficult and take a long time." Tommy, despite being only 8 years old, understood immediately that this was something far more serious than a cold or flu. He had heard the word cancer before in whispered conversations between adults, and he knew instinctively that it was something that made people very sick and sometimes meant they might die. The weeks that followed Mrs. Vasquez's revelation were a blur of hospital visits, medical appointments, and increasingly frequent absences from school, as Tommy accompanied his mother to various treatments and consultations with specialists. Sarah had been diagnosed with aggressive breast cancer that had already begun to spread, and the prognosis was uncertain at best. Despite the overwhelming nature of their situation, Sarah tried desperately to maintain some sense of normalcy for Tommy's sake. She continued working as much as her treatments would allow, though her energy energy levels were declining rapidly due to the effects of chemotherapy. She still played Elvis's music in their apartment, though now it often brought tears to both their eyes, as they wondered how much longer they would have to enjoy these simple moments together. It was during this incredibly difficult period that Sarah learned about Elvis's upcoming concert series at the International Hotel in Las Vegas. Elvis was scheduled to perform for 2 weeks in December, with shows every night except Sundays. For the first time since her diagnosis, Sarah felt a spark of excitement and hope about something in the future. She realized that taking Tommy to see Elvis perform live might be one of the most meaningful gifts she could give her son, especially given the uncertainty about her own future and how much longer she would be able to create special memories with him. However, Sarah's financial situation had become increasingly desperate due to her medical expenses and reduced work schedule. The cost of even the least expensive tickets to see Elvis was far beyond what she could afford, especially with the mounting bills from her cancer treatment. But Sarah was determined to find a way. She began working extra shifts whenever she felt strong enough, often pushing herself far beyond what her doctors recommended. She sold some of her jewelry and small household items of value. She even took on additional cleaning work for some of the casino's high-roller suites during her off hours, despite her exhaustion and the physical toll of her chemotherapy treatments. Slowly, painfully, over the course of several weeks, Sarah managed to save enough money for 2 tickets to Elvis's show. They weren't the best seats in the house. Those were far too expensive, but they were close enough that Tommy would be able to see Elvis clearly and feel truly connected to the performance he had been dreaming about for years. When Sarah surprised Tommy with the tickets one evening after he returned from Mrs. Vasquez's apartment, the boy's reaction was nothing short of pure joy. He stared at the tickets in disbelief for several long moments before throwing his arms around his mother and hugging her tighter than he had ever hugged anyone in his entire life. "Really, Mama? Really, truly?" Tommy asked, his voice filled with wonder and excitement that seemed to light up their modest apartment. "Really, truly, baby," Sarah replied, fighting back tears of both happiness and sadness, as she realized this might be one of the last special experiences she would be able to share with her son. The weeks leading up to the concert became a countdown filled with anticipation and excitement that temporarily overshadowed some of the darkness surrounding Sarah's illness. Tommy talked about nothing else, planning what he would wear, imagining what songs Elvis might perform, and dreaming about the magical evening that lay ahead. But as the concert date approached, Sarah's condition began to deteriorate more rapidly than anyone had anticipated. The aggressive nature of her cancer, combined with the stress of working extra hours to afford the concert tickets, had taken a severe toll on her already weakened body. 3 days before the scheduled Elvis concert, Sarah collapsed at work during her shift at the casino. She was rushed to the hospital, where doctors informed her that her cancer had progressed significantly and that she needed to be admitted immediately for intensive treatment. "How long will I be here?" Sarah asked the doctor, though she already suspected the answer based on his grave expression. "At least a week, possibly longer, doctor," Martinez replied gently. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but your condition has worsened considerably. We need to start a more aggressive treatment protocol immediately." Sarah's heart broke not for herself, but for Tommy. She realized that she would not be able to take him to the Elvis concert they had both been anticipating for weeks. The tickets she had worked so hard to afford, the dream they had been sharing, would be meaningless if she was confined to a hospital bed. That evening, as Tommy sat beside his mother's hospital bed holding her hand, Sarah had to deliver the devastating news that they would not be able to attend the Elvis concert after all. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Mama's too sick to go to the concert. We'll have to miss it." Tommy, despite his young age, surprised his mother with his maturity and understanding. "It's okay, Mama," he said, though his own eyes were filled with tears. "The most important thing is for you to get better. Elvis will come back someday." But even as Tommy tried to be brave for his mother's sake, the disappointment was was overwhelming. This had been more than just a concert to him. It had been a beacon of hope during the most difficult period of his young life, a promised moment of joy and connection with the music that had sustained him through his mother's illness. Mrs. Vasquez, who had become increasingly involved in caring for Tommy during Sarah's hospitalization, recognized how devastated the boy was about missing the concert. Despite his attempts to hide his disappointment, she could see the sadness in his eyes and the way he listlessly moved through his daily routines. On the night of the Elvis concert, Mrs. Vasquez made a decision that would change everything. She had been saving a small amount of money each month from her modest Social Security check, originally intending to use it for emergency expenses. But seeing Tommy's heartbreak, she realized that this qualified as an emergency of the most important kind. "Tommy," she said that evening as they sat in her apartment, "I want to take you to see Elvis tonight." Tommy looked up at her with confusion and disbelief. "But Mrs. Vasquez, we don't have tickets, and Mama can't come." "I know your mama can't come, mijo, but she would want you to go, and I think I can get us tickets. Sometimes miracles happen when we need them most." What Mrs. Vasquez didn't tell Tommy was that she had called the International Hotel earlier that day and spoken with a sympathetic box office manager, explaining Tommy's situation and his mother's illness. The manager, moved by the story, had mentioned that sometimes tickets became available at the last minute due to cancellations or no-shows. That evening, Mrs. Vasquez and Tommy arrived at the International Hotel 2 hours before showtime, hoping against hope that they might be able to purchase last-minute tickets. Mrs. Vasquez had brought every dollar she had saved, knowing it still might not be enough, but determined to try everything possible. As they waited in the lobby, Tommy's excitement was tempered by worry about his mother lying alone in her hospital bed. He kept asking Mrs. Vasquez if they should call the hospital to check on her, and whether it was right for him to be enjoying himself while his mother was so sick. "Your mama wants you to be happy, Tommy," Mrs. Vasquez assured him. "She worked very hard to make this possible for you. The best thing you can do for her is to enjoy every minute of this evening." 20 minutes before showtime, a miracle occurred. A well-dressed couple approached the box office to return 2 tickets for that evening's show due to a family emergency. The tickets were good seats, much better than anything Mrs. Vasquez could have afforded at full price, and the box office manager, remembering her earlier phone call, immediately offered them to her at a significantly reduced price. Tommy could hardly believe what was happening as Mrs. Vasquez purchased the tickets and they were escorted to their seats. They were located in the 8th row, close enough that Tommy could clearly see the stage and would feel genuinely connected to the performance. As they settled into their seats, Tommy's excitement was mixed with a profound sadness that his mother couldn't share this moment with him. He kept looking at the empty seat beside him and wishing desperately that Sarah could be there to experience this dream they had shared for so long. The lights dimmed, and the familiar opening strains of "That's All Right" filled the arena. When Elvis walked onto the stage in his iconic white jumpsuit, the crowd erupted in thunderous applause and screams of adoration. Tommy had seen pictures and television performances, but nothing had prepared him for the overwhelming presence and charisma that Elvis projected in person. For the first few songs, Tommy was completely mesmerized. He sang along quietly to every word, his young voice blending with thousands of others in the arena. Elvis moved across the stage with the fluid grace and magnetic energy that had made him a legend, connecting with his audience in a way that seemed both intimate and grand. But as the concert progressed, Tommy's emotions began to overwhelm him. Watching Elvis perform "Love Me Tender," the same song from his treasured vinyl record at home, brought back memories of listening to that music with his mother during happier times. The realization that she was lying in a hospital bed while he was experiencing this magical evening began to weigh heavily on his young heart. During "Can't Help Falling in Love," Tommy's favorite Elvis song, and one that his mother often sang to him as a lullaby, the boy's composure finally broke completely. Tears began streaming down his face as he thought about his mother fighting for her life in the hospital, about the uncertainty of their future, and about how unfair it seemed that she couldn't share this moment with him. Mrs. Vasquez noticed Tommy's distress and put her arm around him, whispering comforting words in Spanish and English. But Tommy's crying became more intense as the emotional weight of his situation, his mother's illness, their financial struggles, and the fear of losing the most important person in his world, crashed over him like a wave. The irony was heartbreaking. Tommy was experiencing the fulfillment of his greatest dream while simultaneously confronting his worst nightmare. The joy of seeing Elvis perform live was inextricably mixed with the grief and fear he felt about his mother's condition. What Tommy didn't know was that Elvis had noticed him in the crowd. Despite performing for thousands of people, Elvis had developed an almost supernatural ability to connect with individual audience members, especially when someone was in distress. During his years of performing, he had learned to read the emotional energy of his audiences, and something about Tommy's visible sadness had caught his attention. Elvis had initially assumed that Tommy was simply overwhelmed by the excitement of the concert. It wasn't uncommon for young fans to become emotional during his performances, but as he continued to watch the boy between songs, Elvis realized that this was something different. Tommy's tears seemed to come from a place of deep pain rather than overwhelming joy. During the brief intermission before his final set, Elvis did something unprecedented. He asked his security team to discreetly find out what was wrong with the crying child in the 8th row. Elvis had always been deeply moved by children in distress, and something about Tommy's obvious anguish troubled him profoundly. Within minutes, Elvis's security chief, Red West, had spoken with Mrs. Vasquez and learned the basic details of Tommy's situation, his mother's cancer diagnosis, their financial struggles, and the fact that Sarah was currently hospitalized and unable to attend the concert she had worked so hard to make possible for her son. When Red returned backstage and quietly briefed Elvis on Tommy's circumstances, the singer's expression changed dramatically. Elvis had always been known for his generosity and compassion, but stories involving sick children and struggling families affected him on a particularly deep level, partly due to his own childhood experiences with poverty and his close relationship with his deceased mother. "That boy is crying because his mama is dying in the hospital?" Elvis asked, his voice filled with emotion. "That's right, boss," Red confirmed. "The old lady with him says the mother has cancer, real bad. She worked extra jobs just to afford those tickets, but now she's too sick to come." Elvis was quiet for several long moments, clearly processing what he had just learned. Those who knew him well recognized the expression on his face. It was the same look he got whenever he was about to make a decision that would surprise everyone around him. "Red," Elvis said finally, "I want you to bring that boy and the lady with him backstage after the show." "No, wait, change of plans. I'm going to do something different." "What do you want to do, Elvis?" Red asked, though he could already sense that whatever Elvis had in mind would be unusual. "I'm going to stop the show and talk to him directly. That boy needs to know that someone sees his pain and cares about what he's going through." Red was stunned by this plan. While Elvis was known for his spontaneous interactions with audiences, stopping a concert to address one individual fan was unprecedented and potentially risky from a crowd control perspective. "Elvis, you sure about this? That's a big crowd out there, and they're expecting a full show." Red, sometimes the most important person in an audience of thousands is the one who needs help the most. That little boy is hurting, and if I can't use this platform to help a child, then what's the point of any of this? When Elvis returned to the stage for his final set, he performed 2 more songs with his usual energy and charisma, but those who knew him well could sense that his attention was divided, that part of his focus remained on the crying child in the 8th row. Finally, during the opening notes of "I Can't Help Falling in Love," ironically, the same song that had triggered Tommy's emotional breakdown, Elvis made his unprecedented decision. He stopped singing mid-verse, stepped away from the microphone, and gestured for the band to stop playing. The arena, which had been filled with thousands of voices singing along, gradually fell silent as people realized that something unexpected was happening. Elvis walked to the edge of the stage and pointed directly toward Tommy's section. "Son," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the arena's sound system, "the little boy in the blue shirt there in the 8th row, can you stand up for me?" Tommy, who had been wiping his eyes and trying to compose himself, looked around in confusion and terror. Mrs. Vasquez gently encouraged him to stand, and slowly, trembling with fear and disbelief, Tommy rose from his seat. The entire arena had turned to look in Tommy's direction, and the silence was profound. Many audience members were confused about what was happening, but they could sense that this was a moment of significance. "What's your name, son?" Elvis asked, his voice gentle and filled with genuine concern. Tommy was so overwhelmed that he couldn't initially find his voice. Mrs. Vasquez whispered encouragement, and finally, in a voice barely audible, even with Elvis's instructions for the sound engineers to pick up any response, Tommy managed to say, "Tommy, Tommy," Elvis repeated, his voice filled with warmth. "I can see that you're sad about something, and I want you to know that I notice when someone in my audience is hurting. Can you tell me what's wrong?" The question hung in the air, and for a moment it seemed as though Tommy might be too overwhelmed to respond. But something about Elvis's genuine concern and the gentle way he was speaking gave Tommy the courage to answer. "My mama is sick," Tommy said, his young voice carrying through the arena's sound system. "She has cancer, and she's in the hospital. She wanted to come tonight, but she couldn't because she's too sick." A collective gasp went through the audience as people realized what they were witnessing. This wasn't a planned part of the show. This was Elvis Presley having a spontaneous, genuine conversation with a heartbroken child about his dying mother. Elvis was quiet for a moment, clearly moved by Tommy's response. When he spoke again, his voice carried a depth of emotion that reached every person in the arena. "Tommy, I want you to know something, son. Your mama may not be here with you tonight, but her love is. Every single day, that woman worked extra hours to buy you these tickets. Every sacrifice she made so you could be here. That's love, and love never leaves us, even when people can't be with us." Elvis paused, and many people in the audience were wiping away their own tears as they watched this extraordinary moment unfold. "Now, Tommy, I want you to listen carefully to this next song, because I'm going to sing it just for you and your mama. And when I sing it, I want you to close your eyes and feel all that love she has for you, because that love is going to help her get better, and it's going to take care of you no matter what happens." What followed was perhaps the most emotionally powerful performance of "Can't Help Falling in Love" that Elvis ever delivered. He sang directly to Tommy, his voice filled with a tenderness and spiritual depth that seemed to transform the song from a simple love ballad into a hymn of hope and healing. As Elvis sang, Tommy closed his eyes, as instructed, and for the first time that evening, his tears were mixed with something that felt like peace. The entire arena was silent except for Elvis's voice, and thousands of people were witnessing what could only be described as a moment of grace. When the song ended, Elvis did something that no one, including his own security team, expected. He walked down from the stage, through the security barrier, and directly to Tommy's row. The crowd parted to make way for him, and within moments, Elvis was standing directly in front of the 8-year-old boy. "Tommy," Elvis said, kneeling down so he was at eye level with the child, "I want you to have this." He removed one of his signature scarves, the kind he usually threw to the audience during performances, and gently placed it around Tommy's neck. "This scarf has been with me for every show on this tour," Elvis explained. "I want you to take it to your mama in the hospital and tell her that Elvis Presley sends his love and his prayers for her to get better soon." Tommy was completely overwhelmed, unable to speak or even fully process what was happening to him. Mrs. Vasquez was crying openly, as were hundreds of people throughout the arena who were witnessing this unprecedented display of compassion. But Elvis wasn't finished. "Tommy, I want you to give me your phone number at the hospital where your mama is staying. I'm going to call her tomorrow and tell her what a brave, wonderful son she has." Elvis's security team was frantically trying to manage the situation, as thousands of audience members were pressing forward to get closer to this extraordinary scene. But Elvis remained focused entirely on Tommy, as if the rest of the world had temporarily ceased to exist. Mrs. Vasquez, with shaking hands, wrote down the hospital's phone number and Sarah's room number on a piece of paper that Elvis tucked carefully into his jumpsuit pocket. "Tommy," Elvis said as he prepared to return to the stage, "your mama is going to be okay. I can feel it. And even if things get scary sometimes, remember that love is the strongest force in the universe, and your mama's love for you is going to get both of you through this." Elvis hugged Tommy gently, and the photograph of that embrace, taken by an audience member with a camera, would later become one of the most famous and beloved images in rock and roll history. As Elvis returned to the stage to complete his concert, the audience erupted in thunderous applause that seemed to last forever. But for Tommy, the rest of the show passed in a blur of surreal joy and disbelief. He kept touching the scarf around his neck, hardly able to believe that Elvis Presley had not only noticed his pain but had stopped an entire concert to comfort him. The next morning, as promised, Elvis called Sarah's hospital room. Sarah, who was weak from treatment but had been eagerly waiting to hear about Tommy's experience at the concert, could hardly believe it when the nurse told her that Elvis Presley was on the phone asking to speak with her. "Mrs. Richardson," Elvis said when Sarah came on the line, "I met your son Tommy last night at my concert, and I want you to know that you have raised an extraordinary young man. His love for you and his bravery in the face of your illness is inspiring." Sarah began crying as Elvis continued, "I also want you to know that I'm going to be praying for your recovery, and I believe with all my heart that you're going to beat this cancer and be around to watch Tommy grow up into the remarkable man I know he's going to become." Elvis talked with Sarah for nearly 20 minutes, asking about her treatment, offering words of encouragement, and sharing his own experiences with family illness and loss. By the end of the conversation, Sarah felt more hopeful than she had since her diagnosis. But Elvis's compassion didn't end with that phone call. Over the following weeks, he arranged for specialists from Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, some of the best cancer doctors in the country, to consult on Sarah's case. He quietly paid for experimental treatments that weren't covered by insurance, and he ensured that Tommy and Sarah had access to the best possible medical care. Perhaps most importantly, Elvis continued to call Sarah regularly throughout her treatment, offering encouragement during her darkest moments and celebrating with her during signs of improvement. Tommy would often talk to Elvis during these calls, sharing updates about school and his dreams for the future. Remarkably, Sarah's condition began to improve dramatically after she started the new treatment protocols that Elvis had helped arrange. While her doctors were cautious about using the word remission too early, her response to treatment exceeded everyone's most optimistic expectations. 6 months after that memorable concert, Sarah was declared cancer-free. Her doctors attributed her recovery to a combination of the experimental treatments, her own determination, and what one physician called the power of hope and love to boost the body's natural healing mechanisms. Tommy and Sarah attended Elvis's next Las Vegas concert series, sitting in front row seats that Elvis had personally arranged for them. When Elvis saw Tommy in the audience, he stopped mid-song once again, though this time it was to celebrate good news rather than comfort sadness. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elvis announced to the crowd, "I want you to meet my friend Tommy Richardson and his beautiful mama, Sarah. 6 months ago, I met Tommy when his mama was fighting cancer. Tonight, I'm happy to tell you that she won that fight, and they're both here to celebrate with us." The arena erupted in cheers and applause as Tommy and Sarah stood and waved. It was a moment of pure joy that seemed to prove Elvis's assertion that love truly could overcome any obstacle. The story of Elvis and Tommy became legendary in Las Vegas and throughout the entertainment world. It demonstrated not just Elvis's capacity for individual compassion, but his understanding that his platform as an entertainer came with the responsibility to use his influence for healing and hope. In the years that followed, Elvis would often tell the story of Tommy as an example of why he performed. "Music isn't just about entertainment," he would say. "It's about connection, healing, and reminding people that they're not alone in their struggles." Tommy grew up with a profound appreciation for the power of compassion and the importance of using whatever gifts one has to help others. He eventually became a pediatric nurse, dedicating his career to caring for children facing serious illnesses, a path directly inspired by his own experience of receiving comfort during his darkest hour. The scarf that Elvis gave Tommy that night remained one of his most treasured possessions throughout his life. But more importantly, the memory of that moment moment when a global superstar stopped everything to comfort a grieving child, shaped Tommy's understanding of how one person's kindness can change everything. Sarah lived for many more years, long enough to see Tommy graduate from college, get married, and have children of his own. She never forgot Elvis's role in her recovery, and she often said that his belief in her healing had given her the strength to keep fighting when she wanted to give up. The photograph of Elvis hugging Tommy became an iconic image, reprinted in magazines and newspapers around the world. It came to symbolize not just Elvis's personal compassion, but the potential for art and entertainment to create moments of genuine human connection and healing. Years later, when music historians discussed Elvis's most important performances, many would point not to his famous television appearances or record-breaking concerts, but to that night in Las Vegas when he stopped a show to comfort a crying child. It demonstrated that sometimes the most powerful thing a performer can do is to step away from the performance and simply be present with someone who needs them. Tommy's story became a reminder that behind every face in a crowd is a human being with their own struggles, fears, and dreams. It showed that true greatness isn't measured by fame or commercial success, but by the willingness to use one's gifts to ease another's suffering. The legacy of that night extended far beyond Tommy and Sarah's lives. It inspired other entertainers to be more aware of their audience's needs and to understand their platforms as opportunities for service rather than just self-expression. It reminded everyone who heard the story that acts of kindness, no matter how small they might seem, can have ripple effects that last for generations. In the end, Tommy's tears that night led to one of the most beautiful examples of human compassion in entertainment history. They proved that sometimes our moments of greatest vulnerability can become doorways to unexpected grace, and that love truly is the most powerful force in the universe, capable of stopping concerts, healing bodies, and transforming lives in ways we never thought possible.